Hi everyone. This next lesson is one of my favorite things to teach in history. Our hands are not always clean in American history. Sometimes we make mistakes, and sometimes they're really bad ones. The Salem Witch Trials are one of the first examples of this. So, without further ado, let's get into this lesson. In Salem, Massachusetts, there was a community of Puritan families who were devoutly religious. They dedicated their lives to appeasing a vengeful God. And with this comes a responsibility. Their responsibility was watching out for any signs of the devil who would be invading their homes and their lives. In the winter of 1692, the daughter of Reverend Samuel Parris became mysteriously ill. Now, Samuel Parris was the minister of Salem Village, so this was a really big deal. Betty Parris would run all over her room. She dove under furniture. She contorted her body in these awful positions. And she complained of pain and fevers. Now, this is obviously incredibly strange. And the doctor who was called, his name was William Griggs, he couldn't find anything wrong with her. All of a sudden, two of her friends started to exhibit the exact same symptoms. The doctor suggested that the girls may be suffering from a supernatural spell or a curse. Now remember, medicine in 1692 is nowhere near the level that we have today. So it was pretty common to blame these mysterious illnesses or strange occurrences on curses. And this is a devoutly religious community. So anything wrong or strange or when something bad happened, very often it was the devil's fault. Now, a man named Cotton Mathers had just published a book called Memorable Providences, and it described the suspected witchcraft of a woman in Boston. Betty was exhibiting similar symptoms to those described in the book. So, the easy and logical conclusion was that Betty was also being tormented by witchcraft. Now, the suspicion of who the witch could be centered around a woman named Tituba. She was the Parris family slave from Barbados. She had been known to talk to the village girls about omens, spells, and enchantments, all from her native folklore. Tituba decided that she was going to make a rye cake, and it was mixed with some of Betty's urine, and she fed it to a dog. Now, this was supposed to see if Betty had been cursed by a witch. The plan backfired horribly on Tituba, and all it did was make the suspicions against her grow immediately. In the span of 4 days, 4 more young women started complaining of biting and pinching sensations. They also fell down in frozen contortions. 2 of these girls, Ann Putnam and Mercy Lewis, started claiming that they saw witches flying through the winter mist. They eventually began naming the witches who were tormenting them. 3 women originally were named by the girls: Tituba, Sarah Goode, and Sarah Osborne. Sarah Goode was a beggar, and Sarah Osborne was an old, difficult woman, and she hadn't attended church in over a year. The women were brought in for questioning. They began to hold trials for the women accused of being witches. Now, there were a number of tests used to determine if a person was a witch. There was a touch test. The person afflicted with fits would become calm when touching the witch who casts a spell on them. There was confession by dunking. They would dunk an accused witch in water until they finally confessed. The Lord's Prayer. If a person could not recite the Lord's Prayer without error, they were considered a witch. Spectral evidence. The accused would claim to have seen the witch in their dreams, working with the devil. Submersion. In this test, the accused was bound and dropped into the water. If they floated, they were considered a witch. Of course, if they didn't float, they would drown, meaning they weren't a witch. This obviously has negative circumstances because if they drowned, yeah, they weren't a witch, but they also were dead. The last test they would use is called pressing. In this test, heavy stones would be placed on the accused. This was supposed to force the confession out of the witch. Unfortunately, the person being pressed couldn't breathe to give a confession even if they wanted to. An 80-year-old man named Giles Corey was crushed to death when this test was used on him. Going through all of these tests, I think it's pretty clear that most of the women were confessing to being a witch because if they didn't, it would kill them. In the end, at least 20 people were put to death, including one man. Oftentimes, if anyone spoke up to defend those who were being prosecuted, they were also considered to be a witch. It's important to know that no witches were burned in America. England had their own witch trouble, and England were the only ones who burnt witches. In Salem, the witches who were put to death were hanged. Over 150 people were jailed on the crime of witchcraft, and some people even died from the poor conditions of the jail. As more and more people were accused, the public began to realize that innocent people were being condemned to death. After months of trials, the governor finally decided to put an end to the witch trials, with the last trials being held in May of 1963. The governor pardoned the rest of the accused witches, and they were released from jail. Now, the youngest Salem witch was the daughter of Sarah Goode, and she was accused at the beginning of the Salem witch trials. She was only 4 years old, and they accused her of being a witch. To this day, we still do not know what actually happened in Salem from 1692 to 1693. An official day of prayer and fasting occurred in January of 1967 as an apology for those killed during the Salem witch trials. Salem is still a city in Massachusetts, and there is one building still standing from 1692. It's used as a memorial for those who were killed during the Salem witch trials. There are many theories to what actually happened in Salem. Many people believe that the girls made it all up. Since most evidence was spectral evidence, there was no concrete evidence to even use in the trials. Still, others believe that maybe there was a strange illness that affected many of the girls all at the same time. Or were the girls actually cursed by witches? What do you think happened? There are many great documentaries on the Salem witch trials that I encourage you to watch if you have time and if you wish to continue learning about this time in American history. Until next time.